Hello and good afternoon, everyone. I want to welcome you to the next installment of the Agricultural Education for All series that NAA and National FFA are partnering on and hosting in collaboration with our friends at Millennial Learning Concepts. This is the second in a series of 6 sessions that we're offering this summer, specifically around the topics of inclusion, diversity, and equity. And again, want to welcome you and thank you for committing your time to this. I'm Ellen Thompson. I work on behalf of the National Association of Agricultural Educators. And we also have one of our staff members, Sarah Warren, joining you today. And she and I will be helping coordinate today's call and supporting the wonderful presenters that we have, and I'll introduce them momentarily. I do want to set up just a couple of pieces of information. As we think about these topics, we know that everyone is here with an open mind and an open heart and ready to learn and ready to listen and ready to share. And we just encourage you to ask questions and to allow yourself to process this information, allow yourself to really think about the things that are being said, and welcome the new perspectives that you all may have. And when you do have questions, we certainly encourage those. And we know that sometimes the questions that you have may be uncomfortable or you don't know how to ask them. And we want you to know this is a safe place. This is a judgment-free zone, and that this is a place to learn and grow and work together. So with that, I would like to first and foremost share with you what the topic that we're covering today is. As I said, this is the second in a series of 6. Last week we kicked off, and they will occur every Wednesday at 3 p.m. Eastern. And those of you that do register online and join the session for the majority of the time will receive professional development certificates, which we will email you to electronically sometime in the next few weeks. And then the sessions are recorded and posted on the NAA professional development page. So all of that is available to you. So today's session is on power, privilege, and practice. Certainly areas or topics that have been highlighted a lot over the course of the last few months, and we're delighted to have our presenters sharing this today. So some of the things that will be discussed today is, what does it mean to have privilege? How do your social identities grant or deny you that privilege? How do you know when you have it and when you don't, what you can do with it? It'll explore these questions and many more. Again, thinking about your own personal experiences and processing that, and you'll begin to maybe uncover some biases that you didn't know existed. And that's okay, as long as we're always learning and growing and using that knowledge to become better humans and better educators. Our presenters today are 2 of our favorites, individuals that we get to work with at NAA and National FFA, Dr. Roger Cleveland. He is the owner and proprietor of Millennial Learning Concepts, which is a consulting firm that focuses on and is an expert in diversity and inclusion out of Kentucky State University. He's widely sought for his experiences and his knowledge. Some of you have been lucky enough to be at some of his sessions before, so this will be a great new topic for him to cover with us. He's led hundreds of staff development opportunities from Alaska to Texas and from Maine to California. And so we're really excited to have him here. He was inducted into the Kentucky Civil Rights Hall of Fame in 2014. So we are among one of the greats for sure. Also, speaking of greats, we have Dr. Lori Wright with us. She's an accomplished higher education professional committed to the principles of diversity, equity, and inclusion. She provides strategic leadership. She is a wonderful advocate for those marginalized and minority groups, and works currently at Northern Kentucky University in Highland Heights, Kentucky. She's the director of serves as the director of TRIO Student Services, and continues to spend a lot of her time in scholarship and research on the areas of oppression, feminism, multicultural leadership, and again, just a tremendous individual who we're very lucky to be able to work with. So I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Wright and to Dr. Cleveland. They do have a poll question that I will be sharing with you all when they give me the go ahead. Otherwise, Dr. Wright, Dr. Cleveland, unmute yourselves, and the floor is yours, and welcome everyone.
All right, good afternoon, everyone. Lori?
Good afternoon. Thank you for having us this afternoon, and we're looking forward to a robust conversation today.
I'm going to, first of all, I just want to thank you all for joining in so we can have this conversation. I don't treat it as like a training. I consider it a facilitated conversation. Training implies that the folks who can control the screen has all the knowledge and information. That's not the case. We all have a knowledge base and we're just sharing with each other. So I'm gonna go ahead and share my screen and get us started here. And there we go. All right. So somebody give me a thumbs up if you can see the PowerPoint. All right, got it from Ellen. So let's jump right in here. And Ellen talked about some of the things we're going to try to address. We're only going to look at provide some content on the intersection between power and privilege. We're going to talk about how you can understand privilege, how you can use that effectively to address social injustices, and then examine the piece we're going to spend a lot of time in is the concepts of allies and accomplice. We want to talk about that near the end of the presentation. And so we're going to give you some vocabulary so we all can be on the same page in a little bit. And then we'll watch a video where some students at the university are talking about power and privilege, but we don't spend most of our time about, okay, what can we do with that information? And then we'll stay on a little while afterwards for those who have questions or whatever. If you want to put some questions in the chat box while we're going through it, Ellen will check those out and let us know some of those questions. So you can kind of stop us if if she sees a burning question, we'll stop and address those. But the part about the ally and the accomplice, we're really going to focus. And as she said, there's no shame and no blame. Okay, this is not about making people feel guilty or whatever. And so we want it to be a safe space where we can actually have some good conversations. But the ideal is also that you take this information and share with other folks also, so we can build a little capacity amongst our teachers. So no shame, no blame. And so we're gonna do a polling question real quick, and Ellen's gonna take over this real quickly. And it's really simple, and then we're gonna just get an idea where we are. So you can go ahead and take that, Ellen.
Okay, give me about 10 seconds here.
No problem.
Okay, so there should be Dr. Cleveland's poll up on your screen. So you can either go to the website address at the top, the poll ev.com//Ellen Thompson 470, or you can text, you have to text the word Ellen Thompson 0470 to the number 22333, and then that'll give you the link to be able to answer this. So we'll give everyone a moment to get all of that done. And then you're going to answer the question, in your opinion, which topic do you believe people find most difficult to engage in conversation about? And then you can answer A, B, C, D, or E based on classism, sexual orientation, religion, racism, or sexism. Did I do okay, Dr. Cleveland?
Yeah, they coming through. They coming through.
And you decide when you want me to.
Yeah, I'm gonna give them a few. Yeah, I'll give them.
Actually, you can just take the sharing rights over from me whenever you're ready.
Okay. Can they see the results right now?
Yes.
Okay, great. Okay.
You can see them, right?
I can see them.
Yeah.
Okay, good.
Yes, I can see
And
them.
yes.
So I think about another minute and we should have everyone. Wow. And while you are finishing up, if you have some observations or comments or thoughts, just put them in the chat. So you just share them with each other, you know. Okay, about 30 more seconds.
Good question.
Okay. Okay. All right. So it looks like that, as you all can see, that D, racism, appears to be the most difficult from your opinion, your experiences, the most difficult to have engaging conversations with. Lori, what do you think about? Were you surprised, Lori, at all?
I wasn't. I was just a little surprised that, well, sexual orientation, you know, had a good number, but I was surprised at the that sexism really didn't get any traction, and maybe that's just because of the world and research space that I live in. But I was surprised that didn't really get any traction. But I agree that racism is, especially now in recent weeks and months, that makes sense.
There were some comments related to that. On the flip side, one person had asked what was the easiest to discuss, which I think might be interesting. And then someone had indicated that they wish that all of the above was an option. And then someone said it depends on who they're talking to, which group they're talking to, and that would, you know, indicate which one might be more difficult. Which one is easiest is also kind of an interesting perspective.
Yeah, that was.
Yeah, and I thought about putting all the above. I don't want to work you too hard, Ellen, but I honestly kind of predicted those two would be just interacting with schools and universities and even corporations.
Right.
You do this poll so this is not unique to this group of folks in this presentation. It seems to be the trend around the United States is race and then usual sexual orientation. So that's going to come up. The poll's that's going to make sense in a little bit as we get deeper into this. But Dr. Wright's going to talk a little bit about common language. We're all on the same page for the next 6 to 7 minutes. So we have some language that we all understand what we mean by that, so we can have a deeper conversation later. And so I'll click and you talk, Lori. All right.
Okay, all right, so we're here on common language. As Dr. Cleveland said, I'm just going to power through these just so that we can have a baseline for our presentation and hopefully some good discussions as we, get to the end of it. But it's just so we have some common language, working knowledge of what it is that we're talking about, especially throughout our presentation and the video when we reference certain, words and languages and things like that. So social power. There we go. Social power is a form of power that is found in society and within politics. While physical power relies upon strength to force another person to act, social power is found within the rules of society and the laws of the land. It rarely uses one-on-one conflicts to force others to act in ways they normally would. So social power really speaks to kind of structural and societal power. Okay, what we got next? All right, power does not corrupt people. The fear of losing power corrupts people.
A little quote there to make you think about that.
Yeah.
All right.
All right. Intersectionality, and I think we saw a little bit of this in the poll that we just finished taking. But intersectionality is a good setup for us today for the remainder of our discussion. Because I think someone said earlier, they wish that they could have said all of the above. So this really speaks to this notion of intersectionality. And we need to understand the experience of individuals at the intersections of gender, which are the social differences to people of different sexes, sexuality, that speaks to our sexual identity and sexual orientation, and race, the classification of individuals based on their physical characteristics. And class, social and economic standing in society. So you can see these right here with some of the choices in our poll. Okay, and so, you know, the whole idea of, you know, hey, we wish we had a category for all of the above, or, you know, it depends on the conversation and who we're talking to and what we're talking about, again, speaks to the nature of intersectionality, the ways in which oppressive institutions, racism, sexism, homophobia, transphobia, ableism, xenophobia, classism, etc., are interconnected and cannot be examined separately from one another. And that was a definition from the African American Policy Forum. So for example, on average, women make less than men in the workplace. So we're kind of inserting some notions of sexism in here. But women of color make even less in the workplace. So in their instance, their gender and their ethnicity are interconnected and creating further disadvantages. So two oppressive institutions that you know, in our work, we call them layers of marginalization. So there's this intersection. So as an African-American, as a Black woman, I can't separate my race from my gender. So at any given time, when I come across oppressive institutions or structures, is it because of my race? Am I being discriminated against because of my race, or is it because I'm a woman and there is sexism at play? And so that's that notion of intersectionality. I can't separate myself from either one of those descriptors.
You know, I don't know if how many of y'all read the maybe seen the movie The Color Purple or read the book The Color Purple, and Alice Walker wrote the book The Color Purple, and she talks about she was the first one to really talk about intersectionality without saying it. And she compares the concept of feminism and a feminist versus a womanist. Mm-hmm. And she was saying that, you know, women of color are womanists, and when other women are feminists, and the difference is like comparing purple to lavender, because they have to have the burden of race also. Even though they're a woman and they can be social class, but they also have that burden of being with race and a woman of color. So it's similar to feminism, but it's not the same. It's kind of close. It's like comparing lavender to purple. And so these concepts are really important, and you can see the intersectionality. So I could have my gender and my race could intersect in different places, and could mean different things in different places, and could also have power in one space and then lose that power because of my ethnicity also. And so these things intersect and doing those things. And also I'd like for you all to just in your chat, just put a yes or a no, or if you're familiar with intersectionality.
And I just saw someone's comment that popped up that was really good. It says, or Black trans women or men have all three concepts, right? So they're fighting against the homophobia, the transphobia, as well as the racism, sexism, right?
Exactly. So whoever put that in there, you know, you're exactly right.
Spot on, right? And I think someone mentioned that this was definitely a new term, and really the term intersectionality, Kimberly Crenshaw, was the one who coined the term intersectionality, and originally, because she was an attorney, that it was used to talk about how folks within the legal system and the justice system are impacted by oppressive institutions. And so ever since she coined that phrase, it's been used to really apply to a lot of this work that we do around social justice and racial justice, this notion of intersectionality. So it's made its way into the broader lexicon and broader conversation, but it was initially coined and used within legal settings to talk about how people of color were negatively impacted by the racist criminal justice institutions.
That's a raised hand. Is a Mandor? Maybe I had their hand raised. Thanks. If not, we can come back to it. Another piece that Lori's going to talk about is oppression.
Okay. And I think that this is, you know, all of these definitions are just outstanding, but this is really going to be a really good platform to launch us into the next part of our conversation when we get to talking about privilege and so forth. But oppression, and I'm sure if you've been tuned in to any of the happenings in the, you know, over the past few weeks and months, this term has been spoken about a lot by social media, mainstream media, this notion of oppression. And while anyone can hold racial prejudice, and any racial prejudice can result in mistreatment, racism results in a special type of mistreatment, oppression. So there's, you know, always pundits and debates around, you know, can folks who are marginalized also be racist, you know, or people say, well, I'm Black and I can't be racist. Oh, I'm, you know, I'm trans and I can't be, you know, I've been impacted by these systems, so there's no way that I can harbor any of this animus, this racial animus. But it really speaks to, as individuals, yes, we can be biased. All of us are biased. We all have implicit biases. We can hold racial prejudices. We can have stereotypes about groups and individuals, and we can then act upon those that result in mistreatment person to person. But the kind of racism that is systemic and is structural, right, is oppression. So oppression results when racism is a part of the dominant culture's national consciousness. And I won't go too much in depth, but if we think about the founding fathers and just the premise that this whole country was founded on, it was founded in a really a white kind of supremacist framework. The founding fathers got to decide in the Constitution that all men were created equal, but they weren't talking about Black men or Black people in that discussion. And so oppression is reinforced through its social institutions. So if we think about now the calls for defunding the police and abolishing, you know, oppressive criminal justice systems and the prison complex and the school to prison pipeline. So oppression is reinforced through social institutions. Education, especially, it took, you know, federal laws to get schools desegregated, you know, and what have you. And there is an imbalance of social and economic power in society. So oppression really is reinforced by this notion of who holds power and who is powerless, and those folks that are in power, how they wield that social and economic power within societal systems and institutions. So as an individual, I might be prejudiced. I might treat my neighbor poorly because I have stereotypes and biases, but as an individual, I am in no position to reinforce anything or to enforce any mistreatment in a wider social system. So I think that's an important distinction to make when we have these conversations.
You know, and that's a good explanation, Lori, which, you know, it's a great transition and segue to what we're going to talk about next. Which is privilege. And this is Peggy McIntosh was one of the pioneers of the whole concept of privilege and white privilege and things of that nature. The whole knapsack, weightless knapsack concept and things of that nature. And so you can see just this initial definition, her quote of privilege. And it's really hard to really talk to people about privilege because I live in Kentucky, and the eastern part of Kentucky, there's a lot of poverty there. So to tell someone who is white, poor, Appalachian that they have privilege, and they look at you like, what? You know, I'm over here struggling. And we began talking, I have privilege and things of that nature. So that's why I was using an example to go into this a little deeper, what we mean by privilege. And what do we mean? Members of the privileged group gain benefits simply by their affiliation with the dominant side of the power system. As I've mentioned myself, I use myself as an example. I have privilege as a male because we live in a patriarchal society, male dominated. And so I have power just by being a male. When they have the blue lights and safe places on campuses, things like that, initially when they start putting those in, they didn't put those in for men because women are being sexually assaulted and things of that nature. And so they're put in harm's way a lot of times in different campuses and things of that nature. But as a male, I have some power, but then I lose some of that power because of my, as I was mentioned before, my race. They're all presented as being based on merit rather than simple affiliation. And so this privilege is like, there's certain places you can do, certain powers you have just because of what your affiliation is, whether that's ethnicity, whether it's gender, social class. So you can, myself and a white male can go into a situation or a restaurant or a job interview or whatever. Now, without opening without him opening his mouth or saying a word, he may have some privileges because of his ethnicity. Okay, just by being like, just depending on the situation. So we could lose. You can lose power or gain power in those situations, and it has nothing to do with your degrees or your education or whatever. It's just the fact that you're affiliated with this particular thing. Sometimes it's race, sometimes it's gender, sometimes it's sexual orientation. And so it all depends. But we walk in that same place again, and those people who own that establishment have issues with somebody who's openly gay. And so they may not see that person as being gay, they see him as white. But when he lets that be known that he's openly gay, he may lose his power because of his affiliation. And I may maintain mine because, I'm heterosexual. So see how it intersects with each other. That's where privilege comes in, is that your affiliation within this power system, and so you're not necessarily responsible for the circumstances that, you're brought into this situation, but you also have to understand that being privileged has power. And the question is, when you have you have privilege, where do you plug that power into? Do you plug that power into the status quo, or do you plug that power in to use that power to address social injustices and things of that nature, which we're going to talk about in a second. You want to chime in, Lori, at all?
Yeah, I mean, I think, for me, it was, even putting within the context, and yes, if we look at intersection and as a Black woman, then there are places where I'm marginalized and I don't have power. But I also think that for me personally, I work with first generation college students and have for the last 30 years. But my daughter's not first generation. She has a mother who has a doctorate. So when it came time for her to apply to college, I've worked in higher education for 27 years. So I didn't need the guidance counselor to assist me because I knew all of the ins and outs. I was able to pay for her to have an SAT tutor to bring her scores up so that she could be eligible for scholarships. We knew what questions to ask. We knew what schools to visit. I had contacts with several of the admissions officers. And so even though I may, in certain settings, because of my intersection of race and gender, be marginalized and experience oppression, I also have to acknowledge individually that I'm not necessarily responsible for the privilege that comes with being educated, like how I got there, but I'm responsible for how I handled it. And so what I did was make my services and make myself available to the friends in her group whose parents were first generation, right? And so, who were having difficulties contacting the school or interacting with the counselors, and I could situate my expertise in that area and say, hey, this is how my privilege within higher education spaces, helps me to ensure that your students have, kind of that proverbial seat at the table. So I think we move in and out of privilege all day and we don't know it, but that's the very nature of privilege, is that you're unaware that you have it. It's this kind of catch-22 that you don't always recognize, is because privilege in and of itself lets you move through spaces where you don't have to recognize it. It just is.
Yeah, even with gender, like we gotta go find a car for my daughter. And I know if I send her by myself, they're gonna try to take advantage of her just because she's a woman, okay? But if I go, I'll get a different conversation. And it's all has nothing to do with, she may know more about cars than I do, probably does. But it's all about how they perceive gender, and they perceive women as weaker. Do you realize that how they name hurricanes, that 12 to 15% people died, more people died during a hurricane if the hurricane's named after a woman, because they don't think the hurricane will be that that destructive because the hurricane's named after a woman. They actually did research on that. That's how wild this is. So let me ask you this question. I don't know how many of you all are very familiar with the whole concept of privilege and male privilege and white privilege. So if I took the term, if I just took white off of white privilege or male off from privilege, does that make sense to you? Just the privilege in general? Go to your chat box and just tell me what your thoughts in general about this whole conversation about privilege and male privilege. And
or can you identify areas where you have privilege?
Yeah. Can you identify areas you have privilege and then areas where you are marginalized? You can be marginalized even though, you know, you may be a white person. But I just told you about the social class and how people are perceived in Appalachia and Eastern Kentucky. And so depending on the space they're occupying at a particular time, they could be marginalized. Well, they are marginalized. I know that. You know, I did my research on it. So what are some things that you think, how do you identify your privilege or you see yourself as privileged in different places? Hit that chat box before we move any further.
Okay, good. Good, Rebecca.
Share me some of those thoughts. Share some of those thoughts with me, Lori.
It says, let's see here. This is, I really like what you're saying about privilege, how you use it. Oh, the chat's moving really fast. How folks have privilege. I can definitely identify areas where I have privilege as a white Christian middle class person, but I also can think of times where I've been marginalized because I was a woman. The idea that an individual moves in and out of privilege is a very helpful concept. Appearance, able-bodied, age, white, absolutely. I can definitely see areas where I have privilege as a white person having income, but then marginalized as a woman. I'm white male, which is privileged, but from a poor rural area, which is not privileged.
Okay.
Absolutely, absolutely.
You know, I can just drop the mic. You all get out right now, because that was the biggest piece of getting that concept, and you all definitely grasping that concept. So because what happens is, because as soon as we go to this, you don't hear too much about male privilege and people and men being upset too much about that. But as soon as you say white privilege, then people are, you know, kind of defensive and things like that. And one of the reasons why people are kind of defensive because we just say white privilege. We don't say male privilege too much. We don't talk about social class privilege and things like that a lot of times. So people are kind of hesitant. Is that a fair statement, Lori?
Yes, and Dr. Cleveland, I see a lot of folks putting in here age and with lots of exclamation points and right. And that did not, I don't think that was one of the polling questions, but absolutely ageism and ableism, you know, and even some of the language that we use, that's ableist language, right? That shifts to the margin people who, you know, who have disabilities. And I just saw something pop up and it was really good and it caught my attention. It went, oh, the privilege that we give absolutely to attractive people is underrated, right? You know, and in marketing and in visual images, you think of like the news reporters, and there were women who said they were pushed out of the mainstream news media when they got a certain age, you know, right? And someone says, I call it, I think, you know, when I think about it, I call it luck. You know, so another kind of another word for privilege would be luck. But I think more, you know, yes, but then you've got a whole system. The whole notion of privilege is that you've got a system or a structure, right, to back you up in that sense, or to affirm your privilege, I guess is a better way to say it.
Yeah, and you can't just look at privilege from an individual point of view. You also got to look at the system.
Right, right.
Okay. So what I want to do is show a video. It's about 6 or 7 minutes. Some students at a university talking about privilege in a variety of different ways, just not about race. So we're going to watch that for a second. Do a breakout and have some conversation amongst ourselves. And then we're going to talk about allies and accomplices and wrap it up. If it'll play.
When we talked about privilege with this group, and we asked the students to identify the kinds of privileges that they had or that they saw other people experiencing, I thought it was really powerful. The young woman who talked about that her history was was the elective, and other students had the ability to have their history as part of the curriculum. The male student who didn't think he had privilege because he was African American, but yet when I asked him about his privilege as a male, and he said, oh, and he got back to it later in the conversation talking about that privilege. The student who realized that in this situation I was uncomfortable and I was playing basketball with friends, and yet I could walk away from that situation because I wasn't comfortable because most of the other people were of a different race than me.
It's probably easy for me as a young Black woman to not see myself as privileged, but in a lot of ways, I grew up in the suburbs. I went to a private school. If you think about it, you probably have some sort of privilege just by virtue of you being in college that others don't. And so it's always important to consider yourself on the macro level as opposed to just the micro level.
I feel like I have to defend myself sometimes when I do say that I'm from the city, because a lot of people, they'll follow up with questions like, did you feel safe? Were you comfortable with the people in your classes? And I have to say that, of course I was, because otherwise they're going to make their own assumptions and they're going to assume what they already had, what they already believed about the city, and that they believe it's dangerous or not a good place. So I feel like I have to defend it. And I feel like it's unfair in a way.
My white male friend was raised in a community of predominantly Black people. And so when I go to play basketball with him in what is again a predominantly Black community on that court, he speaks of the language. He speaks in a way that I'm not used to interacting with. And I see what it's like to be surrounded by something in which I am the odd one out, in which I am isolated and it's not comfortable for me. And I find myself struggling to decide, how do I react? Do I try to, quote, speak the language? Do I try to fit in? Or will that be seen as appropriation or being something that I'm not? Or, so if I don't do that, is my speaking the way I'm used to, interacting the way I'm used to, only highlight the differences between the two communities that I'm trying to bridge? At the end of the day, despite all this uncomfortableness, this isolation, I know that myself as a white male can still step out of that. I don't have to experience that discomfort all the time. And that in and of itself is a privilege that not everyone has the opportunity to have.
How do we engage others in conversations who don't see the value in having these conversations? Some of the more difficult conversations that you can have are confronting people who don't have the same language around race and privilege.
I think that having conversations about race and privilege is definitely more of an opportunity to bridge us together than taking us apart, because we're acknowledging how we're feeling in situations, our experiences, and just talking about those allows us to self-reflect and step into the shoes of somebody else, and to really take some time to actively listen to the experiences of others, whether they are experiencing privilege or experiencing oppression. Really taking that time and having those difficult conversations, even when you feel uncomfortable and don't know what to say, to simply acknowledge that that is somebody else's experience is a very powerful moment in that type of dialogue.
We know that the more that we have conversations around difference, and that we interact with people that are different than us, that it will decrease prejudice. You know, the studies have shown you want to decrease prejudice, interact more with people who are different than you.
We are all individuals who have some privileges and don't have others. You know, rarely is there a case in which someone has all of them or none of them. We all need to be able to take a step back and find where our privileges are and where that gives us a responsibility and where our privileges aren't and what needs to be done to address that situation. Everyone belongs and is relevant in that circle purely because of the combination of privileges they do and do not have.
I think the responsibilities that we have having privilege is that we have to continue these conversations. We have to go into classrooms and talk about it. We have to talk about it in everyday situations, because race does not stay in one little bubble. It affects every aspect of life.
We have a unique opportunity on a college campus to change the world. I really believe that. It's why we do this work, that we can begin these conversations. We are with students who are saying, I want to learn. If you look at this group, we had mostly sophomores, juniors, and seniors who were in the room and ready to engage with this. And they talked about what happens when they go home and the people who haven't left home and how those conversations are different. Something about this environment has already piqued their interest and helped them see that this was important for them to start to learn about this, and that they wanted to try to tease out what the issues were and what it meant to them and what their responsibilities were around these issues.
People are having similar questions and experiences that I am right now, and hearing those who are experiencing oppression in relation to race and privilege, how they want to speak about these conversations, and hearing that other college students really want to have these conversations is something that's very inspiring to me. So just hearing how people haven't begun these conversations has helped me understand how to do that in the future.
Some of the responsibilities that I have or anyone has when they are in a position of privilege is to help to bridge that gap. And that means empowering those who may feel that they are isolated in a situation, giving silent voices the opportunity to speak, knowing when your voice should be silent in order to allow that to happen.
So the privilege that they identified, that they connected with, was just really powerful to hear them put those pieces into place. It was an amazing discussion. These students have something going on, and the way they teach us and learn from us, and it's an amazing experience.
Okay, in a second we're gonna go to our breakout rooms, and I didn't want to get putting words in your mouth, so I just put in what you learned from the comments in the video. You can talk about what you want to talk about in the breakout room. So whenever Ellen and Sarah are ready, they're gonna send us to the breakout rooms. You only have 5 minutes, so you don't have time to pontificate. You gotta get to it, and then we'll come back out, and then we'll move forward to allies and accomplices. So whenever you want to send us over to our breakout rooms, we'll be ready.
Okay.
So while they're there, you want them to discuss that question, right? What did you learn from the comments in the video? So everyone, so can Dr. Cleveland or Dr. Wright, I'm going to put that in the chat quick so everyone has that.
Okay.
No
and
problem.
Then Sarah, whenever you're ready, if you can randomly assign us, and everyone that's never done this before, a thing will pop up on your screen to accept the breakout room, and then in 5 minutes, you'll be automatically brought back to the main session.
I'm opening them as soon as you put the question in the chat.
Okay. Oh dear, it's waiting on me. Oh Lord. I'm shortening the question. Okay.
Okay, all rooms are open now.
Thank you, Sarah.
Maybe next time we can get a few extra minutes in the breakout session.
You're muted.
Is everyone back?
It looks like we're getting there.
Yes,
Okay.
everyone's back.
Okay. I want to share a couple more things and then we'll wrap this up.
Dr. Cleveland, if you see in the chat, there was a question from our group that if you can answer during the main session, great. Otherwise we can stay after, but it was specifically from a teacher who was working with some students, and they were talking about privilege, and one of the students said to the teacher that privilege wasn't a real thing, and the educator did not know how to properly respond to that, and maybe providing her and the rest of the group with some specific concrete examples of, you know, what I know we've listed some here today, but if you could provide some additional ones, or a growth-minded response for that teacher to be able to use with the students.
Okay. You think we'll see if we have time near the end? Get through. I want to talk about allies and accomplices real quickly.
Okay. Sounds good.
Yes. Okay. So what can we do? Become an ally or an accomplice? I'll let Lori talk about allyship, and then I'll talk about accomplices, and then we'll try to get back to Ellen's question.
Okay. All right. So in social justice work, the term ally is often defined as a person who uses their privilege to advocate on behalf of someone else who doesn't hold the same privilege. Allyship is one of the first action-oriented tools that one learns in social justice and bias trainings. And, you know, a lot of that kind of came up in the chat. Well, I have this privilege. What can I do for the greater good? How can I use my privilege to help? And one of the ways that you can do that is to become an ally. And here are some of the characteristics of allies: that they're comfortable with their own identity, that they initiate learning about others. Allies acknowledge their own unearned privileges and work to change privileges into rights that target members can enjoy. And allies are willing to take risk. And so and they're committed to action. If you've seen a lot of the protests, the racial protests lately, and there are in a lot of cities, you probably will see more white students or white people out protesting than you do Black people at times. And those are allies. That's what we call in the social justice movement, allies, right? That they're comfortable with who they are, understand that they have unearned privileges, but they're out there working actively to change their privileges and the same privilege, the rights that they enjoy as a result of having those privileges, into rights and benefits that other members in the broader community and society can also join. And, you know, again, kind of using the protest as that visual, willing to take risk, you know, so that could be speaking up, speaking out, calling into, you know, to accountability where you see that you have policies and things at your institutions or schools that are harming people. So you're going to speak up for those who don't have privilege, and you're committed to taking action, absolutely, as an ally. So allies are not silent partners. They're very active in that fight.
Okay, and so the accomplice piece is that, you know, ally, as Lori said, they mostly engage in activism. They'll stand next to the person, they're out there protesting and things of that nature, or doing other things. But accomplice will focus on more dismantling the structure or the system of oppression or racism. And so one of the allies, they're out there with you, but an accomplice will take it a step further and deal with the systemic issues around policies and things of that nature, and try to dismantle the structure of social injustices and institutionalized racism and things of that nature. So both are good. Accomplices takes it to another level and try to address it systemically. An ally is there with you, doing the work and things like that. The difference is the individual piece and then versus a systemic piece. And you can talk about that also if you want to, Lori, chime in a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, you know, and we saw this at the institution where I worked, that a good friend of mine, a white woman who's phenomenal, one of my best friends, and there was a position that was open for administrative assistant in their group where they serve affinity students, students of different race and ethnic groups. And they needed an admin for that office. And she said, you know, while I'm qualified and absolutely would love to do that, I want to step aside and I'm going to recommend an African-American woman that I know that would be great at this, so that she can have that opportunity to really help to shape programming and experiences and that sense of belonging for those students of color in that space. So she is an ally, clearly a very vocal ally, but in that instance, she became an accomplice because she said, I can wait, I'm a white woman. You know, I can get opportunities all the time. We need, you know, we're in an active, you know, search to improve our minority hiring numbers. And here's an opportunity for an African-American woman to engage with the population of students that she's, you know, really passionate about. Not that the white woman wasn't, but that was an example of that shift from an ally to an accomplice to help dismantle that structure from within, where a lot of the positions would go to white individuals at the university. So, you know, those are just examples. I think someone put in the chat, how do you move from ally to accomplice? And so if you're looking at accomplice and you're dismantling the structures from within, allies might have to engage other people. So as allies, you may know the folks in power, you may know the folks that are upholding that power structure and that you have relationship with. So when you shift to then talking about, hey, I want to be on that hiring committee, or hey, I want to be in that space where we're developing curriculum or working with students, because I want to use my forces and bring my community and my group of people together to help kind of dismantle that structure. And then Aaron says, there are so many injustices to fight for. We can only do so much. Right, you as allies, you have to prioritize your energy and how you want to triage what fight demands your attention. Absolutely. That's why you got to recruit more allies.
Exactly. You know, and I know, and I'm going to show a couple of things that, you know, I also want you to look at a couple of things you can do personally or professionally, and maybe pick one or two off each side that you can do the next month or so. Some of you have already done this, so you may want to go deeper. You know, a cultural event is like really low level, not that deep, but having a conversation between participating in a workshop like this around social justice. And the other part is really just having conversations with people, your friends, and then folks who may think differently. You're living in a different social space or exist in a different social, and definitely reading. The professional side, investigating and more research about this, listen to different speakers. And Ellen had asked a question about the student in the classroom. Ellen, is that high school, college, or do you know?
I expect that it was high school. I believe it was like an FFA chapter retreat situation that it occurred at.
Mm-hmm. I mean, it could be something as simple as this, and people don't even think about this because they're privileged. How many times you go into a store and it says flesh-covered Band-Aids? And the flesh doesn't look like mine. You know, you can almost guarantee to live in a neighborhood where people look like you. I mean, you know, so it's kind of hard, you know, especially with high school students. You got to think about their experiences they've had, but something that simple as you call flesh, what's normal, things like that give you privilege, because when you think about normal and what is flesh, things like that, you think of white, and it seems something really simple, but sometimes you got to break it down very simple and give them an example that's pretty simple to understand. Laura, you want to?
And I think also, you know, we talked about this a little earlier, is kind of broadening the definition of privilege beyond those things that you can easily see. But for students, I think always good examples around ableism, right? You know, and the things that the privilege that they have, they don't have to worry about how wide the door is. Can my wheelchair fit in there? Or if I want to go, we were supposed to go, my doctoral group last summer was going to take a trip to Ghana. And one of our doctoral members was like, well, you guys, we were all gung-ho and ready to go and paying our money to the trip. And she has mobility issues. And, you know, we didn't even think about Caroline. We were just gung-ho. We all were going to plan. It was a class of us that we were going to go. And she said, I can't go. I won't be able to get around. I won't be able to have my wheelchair there. That trip is not for me. And even the person organizing the trip said, you know what, I've done this, you know, retreat in Ghana for the last 30 years. I've never had a person with mobility issues come. So I don't even know how to prepare, how to make sure the hotel, where we're going to be doing a lot of walking. So I think if you're, you know, using examples with students, kind of make it things that they deal with in their everyday life, right? That they may not think of as privilege. And I think kind of introduce the discussion that way in places where they can understand, instead of always kind of centering around a racial juxtaposition that they may not really fully understand. But we all can understand, you know, if you've ever had a surgery or any orthopedic condition where now suddenly you find yourself on crutches and unable to get around, you really realize how much privilege you have when you were up and walking upright, as opposed to now when you've got to rely on people to assist you when you can't go all of the places that you wanted to go because of, you know, your crutches or your wheelchair, things like that.
And you can make it a current issue right now with COVID-19. I'm very privileged because I work in a profession where I can work at home. I'm not an essential worker.
Right.
And so I have some privilege because I don't have to put myself in harm's way for 8 to 10 hours and then come back home and possibly infect my family. That's privilege. So you can tell the students about what's going on COVID-19 is a way to explain privilege. And that you could be white, African-American, Latinx, gay, whatever. But if you're in that hourly type of job and you're considered essential, and we have privilege over that. You know, you have no choice to go out there in that situation. So you can even make it in a current event where they can understand it also. It don't always have to be about racism or like Lori said, you can put it somewhere. It's almost like contextualized teaching. You know, you put it in a context where they understand it. And then once they grasp the understanding, then you can go deeper about issues of social injustice and things of that nature.
And a lot of people are mentioning in the chat that the resource from Peggy McIntosh, and thank you for the person who put the link in there that talks about white privilege, but again, the ideology that can be applied to most types of privilege to kind of unpack your knapsack of privilege, what's in your knapsack of privilege.
Right.
And then,
up on me, I think.
Yeah, and so I think that way, you know, you can help to, again, bring some context to your own discussions, your own journey, you know, as you unpack all of these things, but then also how we help our students by introducing, and if we do that, we can introduce the concepts and conversations a lot earlier.
Exactly. And here's some resources. I'm gonna go back for a second. A couple of things that you can do, and also, as she said, the Peggy McIntosh's The Invisible Knapsack, that gives you some really simple examples of privilege, and then some other things that kind of like what we're doing right now and other possibilities, and then some books and video. I mean, there's a lot more to this that but one, we've had Robin DiAngelo in Lexington twice, and she has the book White Fragility. It's a good read, heavy read. You're going to read it a few times, you know. So you want to talk about race, me, and white supremacy. Talked to some students about that recently. Videos, The Hate You Give. I don't know, there's a series of videos by a guy who used to play football at University of Texas. I can't think of his name right now, but he's
Emmanuel Acho.
Yeah, and he's got these uncomfortable conversations with a black man. He talks about a lot of things that's going on right now and how to just deconstruct racism and things of that nature. So, you know, going back, and we can answer some questions, have a conversation once we finish this, which we are close to that. But it's about power. How do you use, once we identified we have privilege, how do we use that privilege as a way to deconstruct social injustices? Where do you plug that power in? Do you plug it into the status quo outlet, or do you plug it into fighting for social injustices, against social injustice and things of that nature, and our privilege and our power and things of that nature? There's a quote that says, equality feels like oppression to those who are privileged. So when you start moving towards equality, it's like there's something, you feel like somebody's doing something to you. But that's, for the most part, that is our presentation. We can get back to, let me stop sharing and have some conversations with you all, or we can take some questions off the chat, or you can unmute and just have at it.
A note to everyone that may
Sarah and got the power.
A note to everyone who may be needing to jump off, just you can find the archive version of this recording as well as the PowerPoint from Dr. Cleveland on the NAA website. Give us a few days, of course, to get all of that put up there, but so that you don't have to have copied all of that information about the resources that he just provided. I do know that we had one question up here that was a pretty good one, and I know you mentioned a few of them, but someone asked if you could please give some examples of institutional racism. So that'll be the question to you, Dr. Cleveland, right after I do a quick little wrap up for those that need to go. So again, thank you to everyone who was able to join today. Those of you that would like to stay on and have further conversations with Dr. Cleveland and Dr. Wright, you are more than welcome to do so. You can either put those questions in the chat, or you can ask them verbally. We'll stay on for about another half an hour till 3:30, and then we'll have to wrap it up. We do have more of these learning sessions for the next 4 weeks, every Wednesday at 3 o'clock Eastern, and you can go to the NAA professional development page to sign up and register for those, and we will get your certificates out in the coming weeks. With that, again, I'd like to thank Dr. Cleveland and Dr. Wright, and those of you that need to carry on with your day, please continue to do so. And those of you that are wanting to stay on and discuss this further, please do so. So I will send it back to you, Dr. Cleveland, with that prompt of what are some examples of institutional racism?
Well, a real quick example and definition is basically that when racism is prevalent in all our institutions, such as education, criminal justice, health, and all those areas. And so you can see, and it's easy to see and identify policies that impact people of a particular race versus other people in a detrimental way. And so that's what we mean by institutionalized racism. It's in the structure. So Ellen can be prejudiced. She can even be even a bigot, but she cannot necessarily, she as an individual have power to be racist in particular institutions. But think about what Lori just said earlier, and what our country was born up against, and it talked about all men being created equally. Well, not everyone was even part of that. Okay, it was particularly white men, and even really women was not really included either. And so when you have these beliefs, they seep into your policies and your practices in different institutions, like criminal justice, like education, like health. And then it plays out when you have something like COVID-19. It's so clear that any kind of, if there is a major storm somewhere part of the United States, this means it's a tornado or a hurricane for people of color, And so as we go through this pandemic, you can't even address it in a universal way, because some people are going through this storm in ocean liners. Some people are going through the storm through yachts. Some people are going through the storm through rowboats. Some people are going through the storm with life preservers. And part of that is due because, the inequities in our institutions.
Exactly. And I think, and Caitlin, she just put a good note in the chat about Ava DuVernay's video or Netflix series called 13 to really understand the prison complex, because it really was kind of created as an outgrowth of, okay, when slavery was made illegal, right, there was the Constitution that said that they still, people could be locked up or put away or held, against their will for, these infractions, and kind of that 13th was the birth of the prison complex, right? And so we know in social justice settings or in racial justice settings, criminal justice, how people of color are treated differently. I also think about, housing, right? And redlining.
Redlining.
So institution, and there were covenants that were present in certain neighborhoods and communities where they said on paper laws and things that people of color couldn't move into those neighborhoods. So if you think about those real strong ethnic neighborhoods like the Irish neighborhoods and the Italian neighborhoods, and so when it was that great migration from the South, Black folks were moving up north and to the Midwest, and they were encountering racial discrimination in housing because those covenants were in place to say, no, you can't move into these neighborhoods.
Lori,
right?
I have one even closer. I mentioned it to Ellen. I was watching United Shades of America.
Oh yeah, with Kamala Bell.
It was all about farming and then agriculture and things like that this past Sunday. And I also talked about the Black Wall Street in Tulsa, but they talked about where if you were a farmer, and you as a Black farmer, it would take between 350 to 400 days to get a loan approved. And for white farmers, it took less than 30 days.
Wow. So a month to a year.
And so they end up suing it. They sued the Department of Ag, U.S. Department of Ag. It took 10 years or so for them to win. And it was obvious. They had all kinds of documentation about the racial discrimination for farming and things of that nature, but that's an institution. And so that's an example where, it takes place. And so, United States, that's a good show. It's about ag and things like that. It wasn't only about racial discrimination, but it's also how individual farmers, white farmers, all farmers were basically being discriminated against also and been pushed out of farming. It's a really good show. It's it comes on every Sunday, but this one was really particularly I wanted to mention today.
I think it's through he did initially, Camus did it through the CNN platform, and it used to come on every Sunday. And I think at one point a couple of years ago, he spent like the day he visited like Klan rallies, and then there were some other things. I mean, so it's it was
interesting. Any other questions in chat?
Yeah, it's really interesting. What else is here on the
What
chat?
else we got going on?
What else we got? Any other questions? Or you can unmute and just, ask your question. Because it's kind of hard to keep track of what's in the chat. So much is coming through. So, ask your questions out, to the group if you want.
Hi, this is Samantha Miller from Indiana. I'm state staff in Indiana. And we are starting the process of reviewing all of our FFA programming for unconscious bias and institutional racism. What resources should we use or consider or reference as we start this process?
Samantha, I have and you can Google it and pull it up. It's called, can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Okay, it's called the Racial Equity Impact Assessment. And it's basically a series of questions, the Racial Equity Impact Assessment. And it's basically a series of questions about when you're going through, you're examining your programs and policies and procedures, things like that, like you are doing. It asks you a series of questions. It basically, when you make these changes, what kind of impact is it going to have on different groups of people, okay? And so I don't know where you live or whatever. It may not be necessarily your African-American students. It may be your poor students. It may be those students are obligated, whoever, ableism and things of that nature. So, but it asks you a series of questions to make sure that you're not excluding anyone or doing anything or creating any kind of barriers or policies that are barriers or detrimental to certain groups or things of that nature. And it's called the Racial Equity Impact Assessment. Somebody, Daniel already typed it in, so Ellen typed it in also. it's a really good guide. It's like about 10 questions, but it really makes you think about your decisions and how those decisions may impact other people. And Samantha, also just looking at defining equity and access, and then as you go through that, just keeping those things as a way, as a filter when you make your decisions. Because most of the time, when people are making changes to policies and programs, things like that, they're not doing it intentionally to exclude people. But because remember, we got our implicit biases. You know, if you're not aware of your implicit bias, you make those decisions, don't even realize you're doing certain people. That makes sense.
Which is an upcoming session, implicit
Yes.
biases and all of that. So,
other questions, thoughts, comments?
Yeah, great questions.
And if you look in the chat, a lot of people are putting good resources in there also. You know, putting good resources. But I really recommend, if you would watch, if you want to talk about institutionalized racism, things like that, systemic racism, watch the video 13th. It goes all the way up to what, 2016, I think?
Yep.
It's a really, really good documentary. It'll explain a lot. It really will. It's called 13th. It's on Netflix.
Just saw something in the chat. Okay, just saw from Stacy, it says, getting the conversation started is the toughest part. Our administration is set on using the line that we are colorblind, therefore stating that we don't need to have these conversations. Any advice on getting that conversation started?
Once again, if they're not ready to talk about race, I use gender sometimes. So if I don't see Ellen or Sarah or Lori as a woman, you know, I'm actually invalidating their experiences as a woman. And I'm also, the fact not seeing them as a woman, I'm denying that there's sexism in our country. So I need to see their gender. Okay, I need to you know, validate their experiences. And so it's okay. So you don't have to start with race. You can start with something else, because usually that's the one that folks don't want to talk about. Is like colorblind. So if you colorblind, you have to see that I'm African American, and if I'm African American, you know, there's some other issues I bring with me by being African American. So the way to avoid it is say I'm colorblind. You see this big black man right here. You know, come on, you know. So, but and if I don't want to deal with issues around homophobia and things like that, well, I can't even tell people are gay or, you know, those kinds of things. Laura, if you want to comment.
And I think another thing, I always go back to ableism in that discussion, because there are people that have visible disabilities and people that don't. But we can't, in our school building and how we think about access and how people get around, and that we are wanting to keep our students safe, saying we don't see disabilities or your invisible disability doesn't matter to me. Well, yeah, it does, because then there are students who have dyslexia. There are students who have cognitive processing issues. There are students that are deaf, that are, you know, that are visible, have visible disabilities. And so how we see people speaks to the way that we treat their humanity. But if I deny those essential parts of who they are, then I can't humanely treat them. So why have policies and why have the things that we have to keep people safe if you're going to say, well, I don't see this, I don't see, that means that they're invisible and that you don't really care whether or not the environment and structure that you currently have supports their needs and their success and their ability to thrive and be successful. So I think if you put it in that context and not necessarily center it around, I don't see color from a racialized standpoint, you speak to some of the broader issues about humanity.
Yeah, and I think looking at the chat, Kimberly is talking about the book White Fragility, and she's correct that, you know, there's a really good examples and thoughts about the colorblind mentality. So, I mean, I told you that when we got on here, we had like 75, 80 people. We all have a knowledge base. We're at different places, different levels. But so, you know, if Kimberly has read the book, and we may have the same thoughts about white fragility and what we read, and then we also have some different thoughts because we had different experiences. And so it'd be perfect to have a conversation with me and Kimberly at different times to get, you know, different perspectives, you know.
And that's where you think of allyship, and that's where those are those spaces where allyship is created, you know, that you come together around some different experiences. But, you know, for instance, I'm a part of a book club right now with white faculty members on our campus, and the book we're reading is They Call Me a Terrorist, which was written by one of the founders of the Black Lives Matter movement. And it's this inter and intra-cultural and racial discussion that we've had all summer that has just been illuminating for so many people. And these are college professors that are teaching in the education college that are helping prepare those teachers like you are that are going out in those classrooms. So helping them have those uncomfortable conversations. But what we're doing is we're building some really strong allies with our teachers who are saying we're going to use our power to enact change from the inside out, because there are some problematic practices that we have in our College of Education that we need to get rid of, because now we see how they have harmed students. So, you know, those are perfect examples.
I have a question for you all. You can unmute your mic or you put it in chat. So usually when I ask that, I do the polling about which area is most difficult to engage in conversation. It usually is race. And usually next is sexual orientation. Why do y'all think that is? Why is it so difficult for people to talk about race or even sexual orientation? Depending on what part of the state of Kentucky you're in, they rather talk about race than sexual orientation. Why do you think that is?
I'll say something. I think that it's difficult to talk about race, partly because I am white. And so I feel like if I talk about race, there's the perspective of, well, you know, you don't necessarily know where you're coming from, or why are you aligning with, quote, their thoughts? And so I think that's why it's a challenge sometimes to talk about race and to speak up. That's it.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, and someone put in yes, absolutely. Someone put in the chat there, it's a very uncomfortable conversation to have and to bring up, and how do you broach it, and how do you bring that up and not center yourself in the conversation if you're not Black or whatever racial group you're talking about. Absolutely. Any other thoughts?
Something that was brought up in the book, Why Are All the Black Kids Sitting Together in the Cafeteria, is when you're growing up, or at least in white culture, somebody points out somebody of a different color, a kid, a little 2-year-old, like, oh, why is she different? You say, hush, don't talk about that. Everyone's the same. And that's actually teaching our children to not notice those differences, instead of saying, oh my gosh, isn't her skin beautiful? Or look at her hair. And we're teaching our children from that young of an age to that colorblind mentality. And it's not something we've ever thought about. It's just something that has been ingrained in our upbringings.
Stacy.
Very good. Yeah, Stacy.
I think we acknowledge racism and sexism. We have to acknowledge our own biases. And I think we also don't know how to have the conversation, what we do when we say, and I've been having conversations, particularly with people through NAAE and FFA probably over the last year and a half. And when you're willing to, first of all, be respectful and civil about the conversations and going in with some objectivity, and then genuine, those conversations go really, it may be only 5 or 6 people, but by having that conversation and people are really sincere and you don't mind being uncomfortable, that gives you more experience of having those conversations. And then you broaden your horizon and have more conversations with people. So, you might not be comfortable going to have 40, 50 people judging you, right, so you start having a conversation. So even as a smaller group, even if you start with your ride or die people, your circle, that's fine, but then expand that circle to have that conversation. You'll see it be much easier to do that. Because quite honestly, the more, it's like me going to, it's like Lori going to a sexism conference. We need to be, the men need to be at the conference, not women need to be at the sexism conference. Men need to be there. And so that's why I like as many people as possible, white people, to talk about these conversations, because it's like a broken record if I'm talking about it, or I'm complaining and things of that nature. But with people like, I would love to have, who was that said that about white fragility up there earlier? I think Kimberly or someone, you know, she and I on the stage talking about, Kimberly, talking about white fragility and talking about institutionalized racism and whatever else. And that'd be a different perspective, the two of us saying that, you know, and talking about it versus just myself if they're talking about it.
And I think if you're, you know, a lot of you have said, you know, how uncomfortable those conversations are broaching them with someone. But I think some of the resources that we have provided, you know, are really good about, you know, just maybe informing some viewpoints that, you know, questions that you have and how to have those conversations. And then once you know, a little bit more comfortable navigating and, you know, those kind of, you know, then expand that out. And then, you know, again, you know, book clubs and discussion groups, you know, for those of you who really want to do the work of unpacking that and how do we make change and how do we become allies and accomplices and those kinds of things. You know, those are the ways that, you know, we call them, they used to be called, you know, and I wrote a whole dissertation on it in consciousness raising groups. And those were kind of the groups that, you know, fueled that civil rights movement and those conversations in the 60s and 70s around change, right? It's just kind of bringing together people in space, you know, building sisterhood and collaboration and just saying, hey, you know, let's just have some conversations. Let's unpack some things. Let's talk about what we've learned and being able to do that in mixed company. I think, you know, they can turn into some really robust conversations. And you know those folks that you can have those safe space conversations, what we're having today, where there's no shame, no blame, you know, maybe starting to think about and even how you can help your students, you know, have book clubs and kind of different discussions so that they can start to do their own work at this early age of, you know, of knowing your biases and, you know, how that impacts the way you see the world, because we all have them.
We're gonna wrap this up, but I see this one person saying a lot. I want to talk to him. Daniel.
I know.
Daniel, what do you have to say to us? You got some good information to share with us.
Yeah, thank you, Daniel.
I just want to say that, you know, I think we're at a really critical time in our country, and I'm glad to be part of this. And I think that it's so imperative. And I was so excited to see a tweet from NAAE, Teach Ag, talking about this very topic, and you know, having the opportunity to participate in the conversation here today, because for a lot of people it is uncomfortable. And you know, I'm still learning. I learn a little bit more each day. I still have quite a bit to learn, but I also know where I come from and my personal experiences and how that has brought me to a place in my life where I realize that we all need to come together to make this work. And if we don't, then we're going to have 400 more years of divisive.
Right.
And that's not, I won't be here for that long, but it's not acceptable to me today.
Right. Right.
So, you know, and I think that there are ways that, you know, the people have been preaching and practicing for a long time about peaceful demonstrations and making change, bringing about positive change in the world. And, you know, so I'm glad to be on this journey. And I want to thank both Dr. Cleveland and Dr. Wright for your contributions today, because without you being here today, nobody else would have been here today. So thank you again for this opportunity.
Well, thank you. Your feedback has been tremendous, your questions and your comments. So thank you for that.
Yeah, I want to thank everyone for, I only have one request, that if you go out and share this conversation with other people, very informal ways, just having this conversation, that's where you actually learn about. Just like Daniel said, I'm still learning, you know, and I learn from people every day. I'll take nothing for granted and don't assume I know everything, but this is you know, this is part of the process. It's a journey, not a destination. Anything else for the good of the order? Great group, Ellen.
Yeah, thank you. This was wonderful.
Yeah, thanks everybody. I will also just say that next week, Thursday, Dr. Cleveland will be hosting a session for state for leaders, for agricultural education professionals who want to do more at the local and state level, and working you through that process for developing your own either state or local inclusion, diversity, and equity plan. We've been, NAA and FFA have been working for the last 3 years on a plan, specifically in the last year and a half with Dr. Cleveland and Dr. Wright. And we've learned a lot from that process about, you know, you need to stay the course and do things right. And so they'll be covering a lot of that and sharing with you how you can get started in your own local or state level on this plan. So information went out on the listserv for that today. And if you want more information too, just let me know. But that's next Thursday at 1:30 Eastern. So again, we're just beginning this conversation. We'll continue to offer these opportunities this summer, this fall. This is not something that's just a moment for us. This is a movement, and we're going to continue to work with professionals like Dr. Wright and Dr. Cleveland and their associates to bring you all what you need to be better, because we can all be better humans and better educators. So thank you all for your time today, and be looking for your PD certificates in the next few weeks. And till next week, everyone. Ta-ta.
All right.
Thank you all.
Thank you.